think we are live. Hello everyone, and welcome to another casual stroll through Middle-earth. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and we're taking a stroll through Eregion today. There was a tough competition between a couple of bordering areas. Trollshaws was ahead for a bit, then Ettenmoors was ahead, but eventually it settled on Eregion. And honestly, it's one of my favorite zones, and one of my favorite pre-Moria zones. So before I get going, just want to make sure everything is sounding good. I'm not echoing or anything like that today. I think I finally got it figured out. It only took me, like 4 or 5 times. And also to ask you all to remind me to drink, because I have a bad habit of not drinking while I'm doing these streams. So if it's been a while, ask a question and remind me to drink. So for those of you that are new to these streams, this is a world design focused stream. So I'm going to take you on a tour through a region of Lord of the Rings Online. I'm not going to be answering any questions related to things like class balance, things like quests and whatnot, because those really aren't my area of expertise. For me, it's best to be able to focus in on the world stuff. So if you've got world design, level design questions, feel free to ask. I know there's been also some conversation about housing going on the message boards lately, so I can dig a little bit into some housing questions as well if you have them. So to get things started, we'll have a drink. Don't worry, it's just ginger ale. So we're starting off here in Eregion. Right behind us is kind of the pass down into the Talbruinen, the Bruinen Gorges of the Trollshaws. Figured, at least acknowledge that a little bit for the people that voted with their hearts for Trollshaws. Eregion was really, I think, a visual departure for us in terms of how we represented forests and whatnot in Eriador at the very least. It feels much kind of brighter and happier, and maybe even, like, in some spots anyways, a bit more intentionally sparse than other regions had been. When we build forests, we very intentionally tried to forest them up as much as possible. But really, with the exception of this dense holly forest right up here in the north, we went a little bit more like savanna and scrubland with it, and tried to push the lighting and the usage of scene assets to make things feel a little bit more forlorn. So for those of you unfamiliar with the area, here is Eregion. Right now I'm way up here near Gwingris. This is the first quest hub that you come into in the area, and yeah, these were a lot of fun assets to play with as well. They were modified versions of some old elf runes that we had that just had a nice little extra sheen to them. Certainly something that the original assets were great for the time when they came out. And then when we built Eregion, we were like, well, we wanna glitz up the elf ruins a little bit more. Best drinking game ever. Drink every time Scenario reminds himself to drink. Blossomberry. Will we see the Ridge Runner route? Yes, that's actually also part of the reason why I love this region, is that it has one of my favorite Easter eggs in it. Maybe a little biased because I built it myself, and it was actually the first piece of quest-ish content that I've ever made for the game, because I was purely focused on just landscape design to begin with. We consider deeds as quests. They're just a different kind of quest. And there is in Eregion a hidden exploration title. So maybe we'll get there and check it out, and we'll see if I am able to actually pull it off. I've done it with pretty much all of my characters that I run through, unless I'm really pressed for time. But so Blueberry Bear asked, how do you choose when to reuse assets or create completely new ones? So we we have a very massive library of assets. We have probably close to 20 years worth of assets in our library between scenes and structures, and all of them are just kind of in different states of fidelity, basically based off of the generation of the gaming technology was at the time that we created them. So there are some assets that um, look their age, particularly some that I myself made when I was a intern at Turbine all those years ago. And then kind of as the game progresses, we kind of push the fidelity of assets a little bit more. When it comes to reusing them, sometimes we've come across asset sets that look and feel really, really good, and we want to reuse them, and we usually try to do a texture variation on them when we go to reuse them. In the case of Eregion, we had a brand new set of trees built. These holly trees were something that were brand new to the region, and they have a little bit more fidelity to them than some of the older Breland and Shire trees might. Oh, hey, that little tower up there is, I think, where we're going to try to go today. Well, not the entirety of where we're trying to go, but at least a part of where we're trying to go. So I love the spot where you suddenly have dread where Sauron lured Amarthiel away from her father. Actually, I believe there are a couple of spots in Eregion where we hit the players with a little bit of dread. There's a burnt, I believe it's burnt Tor, which is, I think, has a small bit of dread on it as well, which I believe in the lore Gandalf scared away wargs by basically setting the hill on fire. He likes setting things on fire, that guy. General question, which you may have already addressed at some point, but recently some tree limbs appear to flash white when turned off per pixel effect stop. Is this a bug to be fixed or something with my graphics? So the wonderful thing about the addition of our new attenuated pixel lighting system is it allows things like normal maps and spec maps to really pop without requiring a class of light that we call a key light. Unfortunately, there are some assets that don't have the right gloss or specularity properties on them because the environments that they were being used in, we were never going to be able to see like the sheen, the gloss map on those. But with this new system, things that didn't have gloss maps before may have some issues that pop up. If you come across some like that, I highly encourage a bug report on them so that we can investigate. Usually it'll be the art team that would look into something like that, but certainly something that we're constantly on the lookout for. There are also some assets that have polygon normals that are facing the wrong way and don't play well with the new lighting system either. In fact, I came across some earlier today that I need to file a bug on once I'm done with the stream. So we are now on the Holland Ridge. Holland is another name for Eregion. So now, let's see if I can remember how to do this. Was it this way? Don't mind my concentration. I'm pretty sure this is not the way I'm supposed to go. So you may see me running into a wall for a little bit. So another question. So since our characters are traveling to the past, is it time to go to Eregion when Sauron attacked? That's a question that I think is best answered by our content team. I don't really have too much insight into the directions of those things. I think we do like the content that we're doing, being able to go back in time like To Mordor Besieged and like to Azanulbazar, as well as even the content that we did in Elderslade with the War of the Three Peaks to kind of show off a different point of time for the landscape. So I wouldn't say it's out of the realm of question, but it is certainly something that maybe if we had the right time for the story to tell the stories, we would. All right, now I am trying very carefully to not fall off an edge. Intentionally difficult to see this path. Let's see, was it up or down? It was down. There we go. I feel like this has been around long enough that it's not much of a surprise. And I did already get this title yesterday while I was exploring around taking screenshots. So no ding for the discovery. But all right. So while we look at this view, I'll take a quick look at the rest of the questions, see what else we have going on here. Was this region released with Shadows of Angmar or Mines of Moria? Thank you for the question, Ish. So this was released prior to the release of the Mines of Moria. It was kind of the content update right before Mines of Moria came out. This was kind of our prelude to that. And it was also our opportunity to sort of like wrap up the storylines that we had going in Eriador and have the players kind of positioned well to start their trek through Moria. So Minstrel by Night says, object draw distances seem to be working weirdly for me. Up to high, it seems to show elements incrementally, but when I go very old. I do know that sometimes our engine likes to adjust performance dynamically. So if you do try to push your push your detail settings up higher, it's possible that the system could automatically be turning them down a little bit. All right, I'm gonna have another drink. So yeah, we are taking a look out over Eregion right now. This region is an area where we wanted to experiment a little bit with the heights of Impassables, and we started doing that to some degree in Forest Shell, but really Eregion was where we wanted to see if we could create Impassables that were fairly low, so basically like a high ditch wall, effectively, that would allow us to look out beyond and see larger portions of the region that may not necessarily be playable, but make this whole space just feel broader and more expansive. And I really love the treatment that we had for this. And whenever I have an opportunity to kind of tear down a wall a little bit, like I did in Breland, with the Archit renovations that I did, I always look for ways to kind of lower a wall, or at the very least lower an initial wall, so it doesn't feel like you are in as much of a deep bowl as you were. Like, I think classic MMO design leaned very heavily on that to keep people penned in, and the further along you get, and the more work you do on games, the more you want to try to break that mold. So one of the things that Soft Snagger mentions that one of the biggest problems with the new areas is we try to push them a bit too hard graphically, and I think that is a challenge for us to produce something that can be visually appealing to modern audiences, people that are not necessarily on board the Lotro train. People that may not have really been interested in Lotro but are considering trying it. We want to try to make sure that we are presenting a space that looks appealing, and is also built with a little bit more modern hardware in mind. Knowing that we still also want to try to balance that with people for people with lower system specs. Do we always hit the mark on that? Not always. Certainly, it's stuff that we try to keep our eyes on and be aware of. We hope that through things like the borrower tests and whatnot, that we'll be able to get feedback that can kind of point us in directions where problem areas might lie, so that we can address them before the product goes live. Again, we don't always hit that mark, but it's something that we do with the best intentions, and hope it works out for us in the end. So Minstrel mentions that not Eregion related, but Azanul Bazaar's performance is stunning compared to areas like the Warsteads of the Rohirrim. I have zero lag and loading. I think Rohan in particular had its own development challenges behind it, because we had to support mounted combat in it, which meant that the way we handle loading things in those areas is a little bit different than the way we would in something like Eregion, where the pace of movement is a little bit slower. So you're mentioning the flat wall in Azanul Bazaar. That is, there were some things that were supposed to have gone in the update to try to limit visibility of that, and I think in part because people's settings can vary very wildly. We can only do so much to obscure view distances. I don't think we're happy with the fact that that is visible like that, but it does kind of push us to think a little bit more on how we can introduce areas like Azanul Bazaar and try to limit visibility to areas that we may not want you to see. There should be some clouds in that area that obscure that, but different detail settings and just the way things load, that may not always work out the way we want it to. Blueberry Bear asks, do you approve of off-map exploration? I have so much fun reaching Rivendell by sneaking into the northern off-map path or exploring the area south of the Lonelands. I have made some public comments. Basically, I'm not a supporter of it, in part because sometimes people find ways into areas that can cause problems for their characters. Infinite floating stuck spots, those kinds of things. If you try to get into an area that you don't have the data on your DATs for, you can get a character stuck in. If you are going to a place that if you sneak in and find a way into a place that isn't ready for public consumption yet, there's also the side of it where it's like, this isn't ready for people to see yet, and we aren't happy about showing off completely unfinished work. In streams like this, like, I'm happy to bop out into unfinished spaces because we're giving you a behind the scenes look. But in actual playtime and play spaces, I prefer it if people didn't do that, because there is a whole lot of unfinishedness out there. And I think there are certainly various groups of people on the message boards that have different thoughts behind that kind of thing. There are some people that they like the challenge of trying to skirt along the boundaries. There are some people that feel that there should be no boundaries at all and they should be able to go wherever they want. But for us, it really is a combination of how do we keep your character safe, and how do we make sure that what you're seeing is kind of presented in, in a way that we want it to be presented in. It's like, you don't, excuse me, you don't ask an artist to really like put in his unfinished work in a gallery, kind of thing. All right, so there have been some conversations on the message boards kind of about this particular area here. So we are at a point where the Fellowship was originally planning to use the Redhorn Pass, but was unable to because of heavy snowfall and an avalanche blocking their way. And there's been some conversation amongst players about, can we remove this avalanche to allow players to pass back and forth between, Rovanian and Eriador. And at least I think in this particular space, we're probably likely to leave it kind of time locked as it is. There may be opportunities in the future for some of those like back or forward in time region versions of this, if it makes sense for the story. But, I think I've mentioned it before, where all of our regions tend to stay pretty time locked, so that we're not, one, doing anything inappropriate to the lore, the canon itself, and two, we're not really contradicting any of the stories that we're telling ourselves. If a major component of the story of the region is, oh, well, we can't go this way because there's an avalanche, but then there's a way up through it, it doesn't always feel like it hits right. Eros216 asks, is there any part of Eregion that you would like to update or refresh? Server is not happy right now. I mean, honestly, if I had any area that I'd like to update or refresh, it would probably be like this kind of area that I'm in now. Like we kind of got the lumpy potato mountains, and I think we do mountains and hills so much better now. It would be really nice to kind of go through and fix that up a little bit. We've also got some of the new cloud assets that we have, which would be great to bring back into this area. We've talked about doing it for here, and we've talked about bringing them into the Misty Mountains as well. And it's really just finding the right time to do something like that. So Peridot says, I'm surprised there's no Hobbit-related material in this region other than conspicuous amounts of food found in the wild. I mean, Hobbit stuff in general is kind of like we have to sneak it in where we can, because I think people really have a strong association with Hobbits in the Shire. And anywhere else where we've introduced them, they've always been kind of this hidden civilization that we just kind of stumble upon, or their observations of us lead them to feel that we're trustworthy enough for them to reveal themselves. So who knows? Maybe there could be lots and lots of hidden Hobbit stuff in Eregion. It's just they don't trust us yet. All right, let's see what other questions we have. What are those graphical glitches in the distance when it turns white? So right now I am running on an admin client, which is a little bit more resource intensive than a standard client, which also means that I do get some other hitching issues and loading issues that you won't normally see in a regular client. Well, there's a storm somewhere around here. All right, we're coming up on Burnt Tor, that's why. So yeah, this client performs a little bit worse than a normal live client, and that's largely because of all of the kind of extra work it's doing in order to support admin activities. What is my favorite part of the region? I really like the areas down by the Ring Forge. I think those are some of my favorite spots. I think the north is like I'm usually a sucker for forests, but I think the holly forest is probably a little bit too dense for my taste. Um, but I do love the kind of like scrub trees, the scrub forest, the kind of like gentle slope to everything. It feels good. Like it feels like you're just running around through an open scrubbed land. You're able to see all of these different ruins off in the distance, and it does a really good job of just making you feel like an old abandoned forgotten place. Um, I think there's certainly like it's one of those, other than doing that bit of land between the Shire and Ered Luin. I would love to. I think my next like pick for if I could expand any region, it would be this one. I love the silhouettes here too. Like this just, and again, I might be biased because I built a lot of this stuff, but um, it feels very different compared to a lot of the other places that we represented up to this point. So, Fuzel Heine asked, and again, I'm sorry if I butcher anyone's name. Is Eregion the only place where you can see a moonbow, or is it intended in a bug? Well, the moonbow, I believe, can be found in a variety of ways, none of which I am familiar with, but I've seen the screenshots of them, and I saw one in when I was in the Great Mountains, um, playing through that content. So it it's not intentional. The rainbow is not supposed to show up at night, but sometimes it does, and it really depends on like where you were before, where you are now, where you're going, how you got there, different ways that you move around the region. A region can cause artifacts like that to occur. Similar to how like the fog will stick to you in a blizzard, and if you do certain things in certain ways. So, are there any Easter eggs in Eregion? Well, I think the primary Easter egg is that the Ridge Racer or the Ridge Runner deed. That is kind of the main one for the area. I don't know of any others specifically that might have been built in here. Um, so it is. I don't think there is anything else, but who knows? There might be. There could be. So yes, we're approaching Mirabelle now. Like I think this is easily one of my favorite looking quest hubs and areas in the region. Um, it's just got a nice complexity to it. It's got this just ruined, destroyed feel that like makes you just want to move into it. Who needs to buy a new house? Just move into Mirabelle. That is not confirmation of Mirabelle housing. Um, so when we were building this, I don't think we were planning on as much of like we were planning on this kind of being, all about Amartheel's story. I don't think we were originally thinking this whole area would get used for it as much as it did. Um, but it was really something that introduced an awesome cinematic moment that we didn't really do too much of up to that point. I think the designers that were doing the epic story um, for um, for this update, um, the designers that were doing the epic story, like they really wanted it to feel like a big, impactful cinematic experience while players were going through it, and they really wanted to pay it off. And I think they did a great job telling kind of the end of Amarthiel and Narmaleth's story. Um, and it really is appropriate that this is kind of one of the most emotionally sad and wistful regions that we had built up to that point to kind of have that be the home for this. You know, between the prison in the Trollshaws and then coming in here, like it is a, you know, it's a sad story to play through, but I think it really paid off very, very well. So let's see. The frills are light green, while the terrain below is a darker green. So this is an artifact of going through and doing some broader quality changes to the assets that are being used in the area. You know, I think when we built the zone, we had a certain set of grass assets, and then, you know, we had to go ahead and make Rohan, which introduced better quality grasses. So we tried to retrofit those and make them work the best we could. There was a system that we built and released, and then unfortunately had to quickly unrelease because it wasn't working quite in the way we wanted to. That would have allowed frills in particular, so things like grasses and plants and whatnot, to take on a little bit of the color of the terrain directly below them. And what that would have done was would have helped make the frills feel a little bit more attached to and blended with the landscape. And when it worked great. Unfortunately, sometimes the information that the frills needed, that things like the grass and the flowers needed, wouldn't be loaded by the time they loaded. So you would get weird, funky rainbow pixel appearances on all of your frills. So we had to remove the system. It is a system that, you know, I spec'd out and worked closely with engineering and art to kind of make happen, and I really hope that someday we can bring it back. I would love to have it back because I think it would really, you know, help a lot of our scene assets feel very grounded in the world they're in as opposed to placed on them. So hopefully someday, but I don't have any sort of ETA on when that might happen. So Squirrel asks, are areas such as Eregion shaped differently with X-Packs pre-patches in mind? You know, we try to have our plans for, you know, what our next expansion pack is, at least at a high level, far enough out so that we can kind of lead our content into it, so that it doesn't feel like it's too major of a perspective shift. So Eregion was built knowing that we were going to Moria, and we had to get to Moria somehow. So how do we get to Moria? Well, we go south. So I think it was an area that was kind of like, in our minds, something that we wanted to do, but was a challenge to do because so much of it existed really kind of outside of, or at least the specifics of it existed outside of the rights that we had. But it was very much intentional that, you know, we came to Eregion before we went on to doing Moria, because we needed a way in. You know, I think things like, you know, Rohan, for example, when we did the first Riders of Rohan expansion pack, you know, Great River was fully intended to be kind of the preamble introduction to some of the culture and concepts that are later more prominent in Rohan itself. So we try to make sure that, you know, where we're going with expansion packs is seated in earlier content. Let's see. So taking a quick pause here for a drink and some more questions. So Eris comments that the music here is really, you know, helps the feeling of forlornness in the region, which I think that's something that we are very successful at, is pairing the audio of Eregion with the thoughts and concepts behind it. I think we do a pretty good job of that, and I think we've been very fortunate to have worked with a number of fantastic musicians over the course of the whole game. I think that there's a lot of character behind music, and I think that we do a very good job of kind of helping further fill the world with character through the inclusion of music. So Dremelix asks, will we ever see eastern parts of Middle-earth like Harad, Rune, and Khand? Certainly, like as we think about like where we're going next, those areas always kind of come up as what's the opportunity here? Is this somewhere that could be good for us to go? Is that somewhere that could be good for us to go? And I think there's certainly an interest in going in those directions as time and story permits. Right now we're at a point where we've cleaned up some of the remnants of Mordor, and we are working on seeing the major dwarf storyline come to an end with Gundabad. So we're certainly going to be looking at where we go next. As far as any details about where that is, it's too early for us to make any comments on that. So Eros asked if I did the design for the interiors of the school and library. Yes, I did, and we'll be checking those out once we finish our overland tour. There are a few dungeon interiors within Eregion that we can scope out. We aren't going to be going into the walls of Moria. I figure when we get through all of Eriador and are preparing to go beyond the boundaries of that region, I may not even put it up to a vote. Moria is probably going to be the first destination after that, because I mean, who wouldn't vote for Moria? So Soft Snaker asks, why don't you just manually paint the frill? Why don't you paint the frills manually? So when we build a new region, we build scene files that dictate the kinds of grasses and whatnot that we use in an area, and we do paint those references down. What becomes tricky and a little bit more challenging is when an asset is updated, or we update the scene files, and those things change behind the scenes. We are often very go. We'll spot check to make sure things look all right, but we aren't going through and repainting everything by hand, because it is a time-consuming effort to do so. The work that was done, even on Eregion, took a couple weeks worth of time, of a designer's time, to go through and update terrain textures, update scene files, and it's really a time and cost issue at that point. Is it worth the time and cost to do effectively a full region rework when that could be spent on either developing new scene files for use in new content? We're trying to continue going forward as much as we can. So why does the Walls of Moria use a portal to enter? So that's because there are basically restrictions to get into Moria. Like, you need to have the expansion pack information or the expansion pack on your account in order to get in. And there are multiple layers of things going on in this space. So similar to the landing in Mirkwood, because of the intense storytelling aspect within this space, the preamble leading up to going into Moria itself, we have to have this here in order to manage the the content, basically. You know, manage your experience through the space. I never noticed the well in the stable in this camp before. Yep. It's little details here and there. So, as far as going into Moria itself, so everything that's happening in the walls of Moria is effectively in the the Eregion region. Everything that happens inside Moria itself is in the Rovanian region, which is a completely separate set of data from one another. So there's no way to contiguously like cross from one to the other. It's effectively two different maps. You know, and we have, I think at this point, we have 5 total different maps that players travel back and forth to. All right, reading this. Dremelox says, awesome, thank you for the answer. I would really love to explore parts of the story from the pre-war perspective and post-war. Not all Easterlings were keen of being under Sauron. Parts of the story could be like Azanul-Bazar and Mordor Besieged, and parts could be current story parts that can be explored. And I think that's one of the, both in terms of the Easterling story, because you know they really, like, we know that they weren't fond of being subjugated in the way that they were, and we're just kind of, they're considered evil by association, you know, and forced into kind of their way of life by Sauron. And similarly, like, you know, our willingness and our flexibility to, you know, play with the time as a setting for where we're going with storylines helps us, at the very least, helps us provide a bit more context to certain characters and to certain peoples, because we could show what their lives were like prior to, you know, Sauron coming in. Again, totally in regards to, you know, if there was an appropriate time and place to tell that story. Yes, so Ettenmoors is not included in the polls largely because PvMP in general is pretty controversial, and I don't include it largely because I want to avoid inviting very challenging and divisive conversation that might occur if we were to tour through that area. I would expect a degree of questions regarding balance that I'm not able to answer, so I feel like it's a little bit safer for me to just stay in places where I'm familiar and comfortable. So DeadXR3 Fiction asks, would you ever do a stream where you would build an area from scratch? It would be really interesting to see the process in which zones are built. Well, so it can take a while to build an area, and the way our tools are set up, because we do use proprietary software for building landscapes and whatnot, it would require a lot of asking to see like what we could do and what would be safe, and it would also, I don't know how well the stream would function because of how I connect to work, but certainly if there is an interest in this sort of thing, it's something that, you know, we can talk about, think about, and consider for the future. All right. So we've kind of run around the entirety of Eregion at this point. The only area that I don't think we really got to was the portion of it that connects in through the, you know, giants and drakes up in the High Moor, which, if you are all okay with skipping through that, can happily take you to some of the interiors for the region. We're going to start with a fairly subdued space. It is not one of our instance spaces. This space was built because we had a, excuse me, one of our designers was really interested in building a waterfall cave. So we have I think we internally called it the Gecko Cave. With our cute little cave lizards. You know, I don't think when we originally proposed these creatures, I don't think we were quite expecting as much Jurassic Park as we got out of them, but they're adorable. So when building a landscape, do you usually start off with big randomized chunks of terrain and then start off sculpting from there? So I think every designer kind of approach it has a slightly different approach to building out landscapes. And me personally, I've been trying to do what I can with a piece of software called World Machine, which allows you to kind of build realistic looking terrain and realistic looking landscapes, and then we can import it into our engine. So like my approach, like if I'm building a whole new region from scratch, most recently I did this with Carbronok for the Gundabad expansion pack, is I will map out how I want the space to look and call out where like major mountains and cliffs and those kinds of details are. I'll use a grayscale image that I've created in Photoshop, kind of representing where the mountains are going to be, and I'll bring that into World Machine and use World Machine to help me sculpt out at a high level. And once I have a mesh that looks like how I want it to look, I will then take that and export it into a format that our game tools, understand, and then work on it further, do further refinements in our level editing software. You know, other people will like start out with high level. You know, they'll use like brushes and ramps to build their mountains and their slopes and whatnot, and then they will further refine and polish it that way. So we have a mix of different styles when it comes to building a region, and I think that like it lets us kind of each work differently. Each one has strengths and weaknesses, and we can kind of like share our best practices amongst each other to try to come up with some of the best looking landscapes. And I think, you know, I'm excited about, you know, what some of these tools like World Machine can do to help us kind of push what the terrain looks like even further. And hopefully we'll have, you know, more time and opportunity to play around with that stuff as we introduce more regions to the game. Eros asks, were the walls of Moria and General Eregion designed at the same time? Yes, they were. So we were in the process of, I think Moria, the actual work on Moria started before the work on Eregion, because I believe Moria, we started doing a lot of our planning and specking work for that while we were working on Forest Shell. Like planning, specking, making maps, doing our, you know, research and whatnot. Like we had a pretty long lead time on it because we knew that was our first expansion pack. Like basically when we launched the game, like we were pretty confident that was going to be our first expansion. So I'm, for people curious, I'm not actually in the instance version of the library at the moment, which is why there's nothing harassing me. So they were kind of built in tandem. We needed to do some work to make sure that we weren't, when we were doing live updates, that we weren't either flooding the user base with data that they weren't going to be needing for months to come, or making sure that like DAT sizes weren't going too big too early. So it got a little complicated on that front, but the actual like implementation of it was happening all at the same time. Yeah, so the intent with the Ettenmoors was to, like, as we were building it, was to try to really make it feel like it was sort of like a greatest hits of Eriador kind of feel. You know, we have the snowy areas, we have the foresty areas, we kind of got a little bit of farmlandish stuff in there, you know, to make it feel like it was a little bit of everything. You know, I don't think, and I think the aspect of the Ettenmoors, just from a world design perspective, that gives it a its biggest, most distinct feeling are the keeps, because there really isn't much like that in Eriador itself. You know, the keeps are pretty, you know, unique to the Ettenmoors. All right, that was the library. Were you a part of the Codemaster development team? I was part of the Turbine development team. Codemasters did a lot of the. There were a couple of parts of the relationship with Codemasters. You know, whether that was through the customer service side of things or the live event side of things. Codemasters itself did not do any of the development. They were our partners over in Europe, which handled the publishing of Lord of the Rings. I'm sure there's more nuance to that relationship than what I had just said, but I think that at least at the level that I was at when that relationship existed, like that was all I really needed to be aware of. Wow, that chair and that is really close to each other. Huh. Those orcs and their crazy way of setting things. So Drommel mentions that he has his special edition box with an unused code in it. I have my special edition box up on the shelf as well, though that is the U.S. release, not the European one. Alright, so that's the school. And then there's one last place to check out in Eregion, which is comparatively newer edition that I was not involved in the creation of, and I still get lost in whenever I take a character into it. We are entering... I don't even remember the name of it. When it loads. This was a really... we're entering Minas Elendur. So I always get lost in here just because the dungeon itself is so big and there are so many different like interconnecting tunnels and hallways. I think at one point this was planned to be a singular large dungeon space that had to be broken apart into smaller sections, similar to the dungeons in similar to the way Sarner got broken up, and to how one of the Barrow dungeons got broken up. I think one of the challenges too is questing in here in dungeons in general the UI does not work great for telling you where, when you're coming up on quest objects and whatnot. So it can be a little hard to, know where you're going. Can I do that? Oh. Someone is turning on. There we go. Yeah, I mean, I think if the intention to be lost in here, if that's the intention of the space, I would have opted for a map treatment similar to the Halls of Memory, where it's just like it's just vague. It's not helpful. I think one of the other tricky things too is because of the way maps are kept in memory. You only get so many maps before the last one in the list kind of gets wiped out. So this space with so many different interiors to it, it further gets you lost because you lose track of really where you are in it. And then we'll go into the big room. So yeah, so that was we're just about out of time, so that was our trip through Eregion. I'll hang out for a few more minutes, see if anyone has any questions about where we've been, what we've seen. This is one of our last full regions for Eriador. We did introduce the Wildwood, which I think was the first one since introducing Eregion. But yeah, honestly, I think one of my favorite looking regions. I think the environment and the skies really do tell such a strong story for the region. And I think that I'm back where I was before. Sweet. I think that it is a kind of great showpiece and a great way for the first epic book in Eriador and in Shadows of Angmar to end in such just a sad and wistful place. And it was a lot of fun to build. I really enjoyed coming up with some of the concepts that we had for the area and trying to push the stylistic direction towards something that made it feel more broad and open compared to other regions that we built. So Dremel asks, would we ever go back in time in Eregion to explore the making of the ring's power better? Much like anything, it is a matter of time and opportunity, and if there is a story that our designers want to tell. I think that I don't want to say no, because we never want to say never to that sort of thing, but I will say that I think for the direction that we're going and the stories that we're telling, it is not something that is necessarily likely in our near future. Get back up on my goat. So yeah, unless there are any other questions, you guys got a couple seconds to get them in, but otherwise I'm gonna wrap it up here. Thank you all for coming and watching and asking your questions. It's always fun to do this, and you guys are great. I'm having a lot of fun doing these, and definitely looking forward to doing more. And we'll see. Maybe next time, Trollshaws will be the victor. Who knows? We've got a month, so you guys can organize everyone to vote for the region that you want to have go next. So anyways, thank you everyone for spending the afternoon here, checking this out, asking your questions. This has been Eregion and a casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. Have a good weekend. Enjoy the weather if you're having great weather, and have a good rest of your day.